Hey guys, welcome back to Ferrigno Freedom Channel. I'm Dante Ferrigno, and I have been on a carnivore way of eating known as the Lion Diet now for a little over 3 years, and it has been one of the best things that's ever happened to me in my life. If you're interested in hearing more about that story, I have tons of videos taking you through from really from day one of this way of eating all the way through to now, and it's all available here. And when I started, I really didn't know much about anything to do with nutrition or diet or what was important. I mean, I knew that a low carb diet had done me some good back in the early 2000s, but that I wound up gaining the weight back. I wound up having all the major issues again, like high blood pressure and whatever issues that I was dealing with at the time. But even once I started eating this way, because I found out it was very simple, ruminant meat, water, and salt, which is what the Lion Diet consists of, it was all I needed to know. I said, well, if that's what I need and it's going to change things for me, I'm willing to give it a shot. I said I was going to give it a shot for 6 weeks, and it did change everything. That was just all I knew at the beginning, and I've learned so much since then. And there's so many books out there that people have written. There's doctors who have given lectures. There's tons of information about there for us to be able to understand why this way of eating is so healthy for us and how this information has been obscured from us as well. It's all available for you to see. One of the things I get the most comments about or questions about is, how are my cholesterol numbers? You're going to die of a heart attack. You're going to have problems with high cholesterol. So you need to stop doing this diet. Or why would I want to do this diet if it's going to give me high cholesterol? The biggest problem I have with that is that we have a complete misunderstanding of what cholesterol is for in the body, what it does, how it works. That is going to be a video for maybe another day, specifically dealing with cholesterol. And several of the carnivore doctors have put out videos talking about cholesterol specifically. So look up Dr. Ken Berry, look up Dr. Sean Baker. There's several doctors who have talked about cholesterol numbers and what they mean and how they're a little different and why they're skewed the way they are. But one of the things that was done and mentioned in several of the books that I've read when I'm studying these things, is this Tokelau migrant study, where these people who lived on a small island in the South Pacific called Tokelau wound up migrating to the mainland, or New Zealand for them. That was the mainland of the area that they lived in. And they also got exposed to Western diets and how it affected their bodies and their overall health situation. And I think it's a very interesting study. And I was even surprised to find that when I looked on YouTube, I did a search for Tokelau migrant study, and the closest thing I found was this Tokelau migration story. And though this gentleman's story is very interesting in the sense that, he grew up on an island, a small island in the South Pacific, where he had very limited access to things, and he wound up moving to the big city, the area that was a big deal to him. But it mostly talks about his personal experiences and his work and finding a job and how they helped each other. It has nothing to do with this migrant study that was done involving nutrition, and nothing else out here seems to have anything to talk about with it. So I thought this would be a great topic for me to come and cover with you guys today, because it's just something that we're not getting a whole lot of information on. So let's take a look here. Now I'm going to try doing something. I don't know if I'm allowed to do this or not. It's available for free online, and I'm not going to read the entire book or even the entire chapter, but I wanted to read some of this section of this chapter that was from Gary Taubes's book, Good Calories, Bad Calories. And yes, sometimes I do need to use my glasses when the print is really small. The particular way this website is set up, I can't see all of the print in one place. I have to slide it back and forth because it's set up in a way that's not easy to see, and it's a small screen that I'm working with. So yes, I have to put my glasses on for this one. All right, from chapter 8, let's go down to this section here. After the United States exploration expedition under Captain Charles Wilkes visited the Polynesian atolls of Tokelau in January of 1841, the expedition's scientists reported finding no evidence of cultivation on the atolls and confessed their surprise that the islanders could thrive on a diet composed primarily of coconuts and fish. Tokelau came under the administration of New Zealand in the mid-1920s. But the atolls remain isolated, visited only by occasional trading ships from Samoa, 300 miles to the north. As a result, Tokelau lingered on the fringes of Western influence. The staples of the diet remained coconuts, fish, and a starchy melon known as breadfruit, introduced in the late 19th century, well into the 1970s. More than 70% of the calories in the Tokelau diet came from coconut. More than 50% came from fat, and 90% of that was saturated. By the mid-1960s, the population of Tokelau had grown to almost 2,000, and the New Zealand government, concerned about the threat of overpopulation, initiated a voluntary migration program during which more than half of the Tokelauans moved to the mainland. From 1968 to 1982, a team of New Zealand anthropologists, physicians, and epidemiologists, led by Ian Pryor, took the opportunity to study the health and diet of the immigrants as they resettled, as well as those who remained behind on the islands as their diets were progressively westernized. This Tokelau Island Migration Study, TIMS, was a remarkably complete survey of the health and diet of all men, women, and children of Tokelauan ancestry. It was also quite likely the most comprehensive migration study ever carried out in the history of nutrition and chronic disease research. On Tokelau, the primary changes during the course of the study came in the mid-1970s with the establishment of a cash economy and trading posts on the atolls. The year-round availability of imported foods led to a decrease in coconut consumption to roughly half of all calories. This was offset by a 7-fold increase in sugar consumption and nearly 6-fold increase in flour consumed, from 12 pounds per person annually to 70 pounds. The islanders also began eating canned meats and frozen foods, which they stored in freezers donated by the United Nations. By 1980, 6 pounds of mutton per capita, 3 pounds of chicken backs, and 5 pounds of tinned corned beef had been consumed. In comparison, 270 pounds of fish were caught per islander in 1981. By then, the trading ships were also delivering annually some 18 pounds per person of crackers, biscuits, and twisties, a cheese-flavored corn snack. Smoking increased dramatically, as did alcohol consumption. Through the 1960s, the only noteworthy health problems on the islands had been skin diseases, asthma, and infectious diseases such as chickenpox, measles, and leprosy. Modern medical services and a trained physician had been available in Tokelau since 1917. In the decades that followed, diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, gout, and cancer appeared. This coincided with a decrease in cholesterol levels, consistent with the decrease in saturated fat consumption. Average weights increased by 20 to 30 pounds in men and women. A similar, albeit smaller, trend was seen in Tokelauan children. The only conspicuous departure from these trends was in 1979 when the chartered passenger and cargo ship Sinpak Rounder ran aground and the islands went 5 months without food or fuel delivery. There was no sugar, flour, tobacco, and starch foods, reported the New Zealand Herald, and the atoll's hospitals reported a shortage of business during the enforced isolation. It was reported that the Tokelauans had been very healthy during that time and had returned to pre-European diet of coconut and fish. many people lost weight and felt very much better, including some of the diabetics. As for the migrants to New Zealand, the move brought immediate and extensive changes in diet. Bread and potatoes replaced breadfruit, meat replaced fish, and coconuts virtually vanished from the diet. Fat and saturated fat consumption dropped to be replaced once again by carbohydrates, the difference being due to a big increase in sucrose consumption. This coincided with an almost immediate increase in weight and blood pressure and a decrease in cholesterol levels. All more pronounced than the increases witnessed on Tokelau, hypertension was twice as common among the migrants as among the Tokelauans who remained on the islands. The migrants also had an exceptionally high incidence of diabetes, gout, osteoarthritis, as well as hypertension. Electrocardiographic evidence suggests that the migrants were at a higher risk for coronary heart disease than were the non-migrants. A number of factors combined to make this higher disease incidence among the migrants difficult to explain. For one thing, the Tokelauans who immigrated smoked fewer cigarettes than those who remained on the atolls, so tobacco was unlikely to explain this pattern of disease. The migrants tended to be younger, too, which should have led to the appearance of less chronic disease on the mainland. And though the weights of the Tokelauan migrants were substantially higher than those of the atoll dwellers, and in fact obesity became a problem for some, the migrant lifestyle was definitively more rigorous of the two. So that means, let's see, that the mainland lifestyle, the migrant lifestyle. So since the migrant lifestyle was the more rigorous of the two, you would think that that increased effort that they're putting out to work and live would be better for their bodies, that it would help them to be in better shape. And it didn't. The men worked in the Forest Service and casting shops of the railway. The women worked in electrical assembly plants or clothing factories, or they cleaned offices during the evening hours, and they walked some distance to and from shops for their purchases. Finally, the original Tokelauan diet had been remarkably high in fat and saturated fat, but the migrants consumed considerably less of both. If Keyes' hypothesis was correct, the migrants should have manifested less of heart disease, not more. So that is the huge point to take away from the fact that these migrants, as they moved to the mainland and started eating more sugars and eating less saturated fat, their cholesterol levels went down, but their chronic illness went way up. Their heart disease, their hypertension, all these problems they started having increased dramatically. It should have been the opposite if what Ansel Keys has been telling us all this time about cholesterol has been true or not. This study shows that the opposite happens when you implement the policies that have got us to the point where we now believe that cholesterol and all the things we've been told about LDL being the bad cholesterol and HDL being the good cholesterol, which is kind of technically true. The HDL, you do want a higher number there. But having LDL down has been the point. Really, overall cholesterol and LDL has been the point of what Ansel Keys was trying to get at, is we've got to cut saturated fat out of our diet to lower these cholesterol levels. Well, the problem here is that their cholesterol levels actually went down, even though they started consuming less saturated fat, but their health problems got worse. And that's the reason I'm putting this video out there, is I thought it would be great for people who haven't looked at something like this study to understand how it is that we can be told one thing and studies like this can be ignored. And unfortunately, these things sometimes take on a momentum of their own. And as the government was trying to put together these guidelines back in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, as they became solidified into our daily life, the powerful moneyed interests that involved the vegetable industry and also people with reputations on the line, people who had spoken for other people and put their name on the line to say that this person is the expert in some field, And even when they start saying something that's not really true, as long as they can make their case, then we're going to stick with that. We're going to keep rolling with that. If it's being financed by Kellogg's or Post or one of these companies that's trying to get more sales of whatever it is that they're harvesting, that's where the problem came in. That's led us to be so misled about cholesterol concerns. So if they implemented basically the plan that Keyes would have done, they switched to a diet that would have followed Keyes's outline, and they wind up getting high blood pressure, obesity, and lower cholesterol. So they're getting these problems that are going to actually cause them to be unhealthy and eventually die earlier than they should because they're following that program. So whenever you try to ask me about cholesterol numbers, you've got to start with the premise of what you know about cholesterol being important for longevity, for health. Is that really what causes plaque in the arteries? Because what many of the carnivores we're seeing out there are reporting CAC scans where they do the carotid artery scan or the plaque scan for the arteries, and they're coming up with zero numbers, even though they're eating fat and protein like crazy. You know, compared to your normal person, I eat about 2 to 3 pounds of beef and fat together every day. Most people don't eat that much in a week. And I have my blood pressure that I had high blood pressure for so many years went away. I haven't had high blood pressure in years now, so I haven't had to take medicine for that. My hormones are getting a little bit better. I mean, I'm still not perfect, but I don't expect to be perfect as long as I'm alive in this life. But I can tell you my health is the best it's ever been since I've been eating this way. But let's actually take a look at the study now. We've looked at what Dr. Taubes' book had talked about with it, and there's a lot more you can read there. You can go to archive.org and read this book. It's a little easier to get the audio book, which I've been listening to from Audible. I'll put a link in the description for the paperback and the Audible version so that you can order that if you'd like. But like I say, you can read the book for free. It's just not quite as easy as reading it on a page-by-page tablet when you have to scroll back and forth like you do on this one. Real quick, I wanted to show you before we take a look at the study itself. This was interesting as I was looking for the information on this study. Most everything out there requires you to have an academic access of some kind. So you have to either be a student or you have to pay to access the information. I don't have a problem with that. I'm just saying that it would be nice if some of this information was a little bit more readily available in the information age, since it's such a valuable piece of information for everyone to be able to see. But I also understand that, you know, somebody like me is making a video talking about it, so they want to have some protection on whatever it is they did here, so that it's only done through their site. So if you do want to read this Tokelau Island Migrant Study, an introduction that's at Oxford Academic, you could go to academic.oup.com and see this same story here, the Tokelau Island Migrant Study introduction. What I found interesting was the abstract. Let me go ahead and put this back on the screen for you. I just realized I wasn't showing you this. So here's Oxford Academic. The website is academic.oup.com, and you can just search for the Tokelau Island Migrant Study and introduction. But the abstract is what I wanted to look at here. And the interesting thing to me is how little the abstract conveys of the importance of this. Let me just read it and you'll get the sense. At least I think you will. In its broadest sense, the Tokelau Island Migrant Study, TIMS, is an analysis of social change. However, it is distinguished from other such studies in several respects. First, it examines the relationship between social change and the health of a specific population. In order to accomplish this, we have synthesized findings from 3 different scientific traditions: ethnography, sociology, and epidemiology. Such a synthesis involves numerous interpretive difficulties. Nonetheless, we believe that such an approach is necessary to present an adequate portrayal of some of the dynamics and consequences of social change for individuals and populations alike. So once you get done reading that abstract, you still have no clue what this is going to tell you about anything. But now that you know what little you know about the study already, does it even touch on the major aspect of what's important here, is that we're figuring out what causes the chronic disease that is so rampant in Western civilization. When we look at this study alone, it should become clear that these new introductions of food are the major change. The smoking difference of the two populations was accounted for. The exercise level of the people who suffered the most increased. So that goes the opposite of what we believe. So we got to start rethinking our nutritional standards based on what we know on this so far. And that abstract doesn't tell us that at all. So I found that interesting. So now let's take a look at the actual study itself. This is on the NIH National Library of Medicine. Migration and Gout, the Tokelau Island Migrant Study. So they have an abstract on this one as well. Let's see how their abstract plays out comparatively. Let me blow this up so I can see it a little better. The prevalence and 14-year incidence of clinical gout and its precursors were investigated in the Polynesian population of Tokelauans living on the Pacific Basin. Non-migrant Tokelauans living in their isolated atoll homeland being compared with migrant Tokelauans living in urban New Zealand. The age-standardized prevalence of gout in Tokelauan men in New Zealand was higher than in non-migrant Tokelauan men, being 21.0 and 19.5 per 1,000 subjects at the beginning of the study, and 51.0 and 14.6 per 1,000 at the end of the study, respectively. Migrant men in New Zealand aged under 55 had higher mean serum uric acid concentrations than non-migrant men of the same age. The prevalence of gout was low in women in both environments. The age-standardized relative risk of developing gout between 1968 and 1982 was 9 times higher in the migrant men than in the non-migrant men. Age, serum uric acid concentration, serum cholesterol concentration, and self-reported alcohol consumption at entry to the study were the best set of predictors of gout in men. Preventative strategies to change body mass, diet, and patterns of alcohol use need to be developed in this population. Okay, well, the only thing I got out of the abstract was that gout was a much higher prevalence once they started on a Western diet that was loaded with sugar and carbohydrates. And the uric acid concentration increased, which is a sign of gout, apparently, or it's linked with gout. Let's just say that, at least at this time period. Introduction. A predisposition to hyperuricemia, I guess I pronounced that right, and gout has been described in a wide range of Polynesian populations in the Pacific in the past 20 years. In some groups, this is linked to other problems, including diabetes, renal failure, hypertension, and obesity. Several prevalence studies have been carried out, but only one prospective survey has been reported in Polynesians. This was the study of New Zealand Maoris, which reported a baseline prevalence of gout of 8.8% and a high incidence of 10.3 per 100 subjects over 11 years. Changes in uric acid concentrations and in the prevalence of gout in response to urbanization and apparent modernization have not, however, been uniform in all Polynesians and have varied in different studies. An earlier study comparing Hawaiians with New Zealand Maoris suggested that they had similar patterns of obesity and hypertension, but that the Hawaiians had low serum uric acid concentrations and no gout. More recent studies of Micronesians in Nauru have shown high rates of hyperuricemia, 64%, and gout, 6.9% in men. This is thought to be related to their extraordinary affluence and lifestyle based on their prosperous phosphate economy. Also in the Pacific, a recent study from Japan suggested that urbanization and change to a diet with a higher intake of animal protein and fat was causing an increase in hyperuricemia and gout. The Tokelau Island Migrant Study, established in 1967 as a multidisciplinary investigation of migration and health in Tokelauans, provided an opportunity to examine the specific effects of urbanization on the prevalence and incidence of gout in a genetically homogeneous group. The unique feature of the study was the documentation of the health of migrants from isolated Tokelau to urban New Zealand both before and after migration. Tokelau consists of 3 small isolated atolls, 3,200 kilometers north of New Zealand. Since the mid-1960s, a large portion of its population has migrated to New Zealand, so that by 1982, nearly 2/3 of all Tokelauans, 2,800 out of 4,360, were living in New Zealand. Life in Tokelau follows a traditional pattern with a subsistence economy dependent on fishing and harvesting of copra, which is exported to Western Samoa. In recent years, more salaried positions have been established. With the development of Tokelau public service and stores have become better equipped and able to offer a wider range of foods, including rice, flour, and sugar. The staple diet consists of coconuts, which give about 54% of energy, fish, and breadfruit supplemented by rice, flour, and sugar. The diet of islanders who migrate to New Zealand undergoes a major change, with an increase in the proportion of meat, carbohydrates, and dairy products, including milk and cream. The overall energy intake is higher in New Zealand. In Tokelau, in the mid-1970s, the total fat intake, which comes largely from coconut, accounted for 48% of energy. Saturated fat yielded 43% of energy. In New Zealand, total fat intake accounted for 41% of energy, with saturated fat yielding 21%. This report describes the changing prevalence and incidence of gout among Tokelauans in Tokelau and New Zealand, and is based on repeated surveys carried out from 1968 to 1982. Subjects and methods. So I'm going to skip up to this part about discussion because most of this study goes into how they did the study and what they excluded and what they included and how they did all of the details that are. If you want to read all that stuff, please check it out here on the NIH website because you can read everything here. I'd like to take a look at the discussion section because after I read through all the other part, it was just like, wow, I'm not really sure what I'm hearing except that it's almost like lawyer speak for how the study was done properly. And from what I can tell, it was very rigorous. And I liked what I read. So, all right, let's take a look at the discussion section. Over the 14 years of the study, the prevalence of gout in Tokelau showed a minor but not significant decrease from 19.5 in 1,000 subjects in round 1 to 14.6 per 1,000 in round 3. In the first survey round in New Zealand, the prevalence of gout was only marginally higher in migrant men. So let's see, the first survey round was only marginally higher because they hadn't been there as long, I'm thinking. An increase became apparent at the second round when the prevalence in the migrant men reached 35.0 per 1,000. It increased to 51.0 per 1,000 in the third round. As both non-migrants and migrants of the same genetic admixture, these changes highlight the important response to environmental changes that occur in migrants at risk for gout. Among the Tokelauan men in New Zealand, the high overall incidence of gout, 90.7 per 10,000 person years at risk, places them in the same high risk class as New Zealand Maoris. In Tokelau, the incidence was much lower, at 11.2 per 10,000 persons years at risk. Age-specific incidences showed that gout was occurring earlier in the migrant men than non-migrant men. In the migrant men, the largest number of new cases occurred among those aged 35 to 44, whereas in the non-migrant men it occurred in those aged 45 to 54. This pattern was evident in the prevalence data. Gout was fairly uncommon in women in both environments. These results are most unlikely to be the result of bias, as although there were several possible sources of bias, its magnitude was thought to be small. Measurable follow-up bias was unlikely with the high coverage rates in this study. Also unlikely was misclassification of the presence or absence of gout. Many Tokelauans, both migrants and non-migrants, were known to have traveled back and forth between Tokelau and New Zealand. This is unlikely to have caused more than a small bias in attributing overall person years at risk to the two environments. particularly as people were excluded from the incidence study at the first examination after their return to Tokelau. Expanded uric acid pools associated with the deposition of uric acid in and around joints is linked to the clinical occurrence of gout. The serum uric acid concentrations in both round 2 and round 3 were significantly higher in the migrants under 55 than in non-migrants, which could be a response to strong environmental effect. Concentrations in the older migrants were lower than those of the non-migrants. The difference in the incidence of gout between Tokelau and New Zealand may be related to several factors influencing purine metabolism associated with a buildup of total uric acid pool. The higher meat consumption in the migrants, the purine content of beer, the influence of alcohol on renal uric acid clearance, and the effect of a gain in body weight and increased muscle mass could all be contributing factors to the pituitive expanded uric acid pools in the migrants. In the multivariate analysis age, serum uric acid and cholesterol concentrations and self-reported consumption of alcohol, all measured at entry, were significantly associated with the incidences of gout, and they may be regarded as the best predictive factors for gout. The mean body mass at entry was greater among the people who later developed gout than among those who remained gout-free, and was also a predictor of the incidence of gout in an alternative multivariate model. It should be noted that the subjects were already somewhat overweight before migration, and that overall weights increased to a greater degree in the migrants than the non-migrants. Upper arm muscle circumference was shown to be a predictor of gout in the New Zealand Maori study, as well as in our population. Earlier work shown in relation between alcohol intake and serum uric acid concentration in Polynesians. The pattern of alcohol use is changing in Tokelauans, both in New Zealand and in Tokelau. This represents changing attitudes to its use in both places. The age-standardized prevalence of self-reported current alcohol use in rounds 1 and 3 was 63% and 73% for migrant men in New Zealand and 36% and 62% for non-migrant men in Tokelau, respectively. Alcohol usage is greater in New Zealand than in Tokelau. Information concerning the mechanisms for the development of gout is not directly available from this study of Tokelauans. Recent work on a sample of 115 Maori men in New Zealand showed a lower urate clearance in gouty and hyperuricemic subjects. This suggested that the susceptibility to hyperuricemia had a renal mechanism in Maoris. Further studies are needed to elucidate these mechanisms in Tokelauan and other Pacific Islanders. This study showed that Tokelauan population has high serum uric acid concentrations, which are higher in younger migrants than non-migrants. The risk of gout was increased in the migrants, with a notably higher prevalence and incidence associated with urbanization and a move to a more Western diet and lifestyle. An important genetic predisposition to gout may be present that is enhanced by the effects of migration. Prevention of weight gain through moderate dietary changes, prudent use of alcohol, and increased physical activity will help prevent gout in migrant Tokelauans. Patients with the disease should be supervised to achieve compliance with treatment regimens. These measures should also help prevent associated disorders such as hypertension and diabetes. Okay, so that's the wrap-up of their study. I think the biggest takeaway you can get from this study is that refined carbohydrates and sugar might disrupt the balance that goes on in our body, leading to chronic disease. It seems obvious to me, but at the same time, you're always going to have those people out there who say, well, how come they're telling us this? How come it's all in the medical stuff? The question is have you looked at any of it yourself? Have you looked at some of the things like we looked at here today to be able to understand, why was this not interpreted the right way? Why was this not used in the presentation of all the guidelines that we've been using to follow for our diet since the 1980s? And why now do we have such an obesity and epidemic going on? So many people with chronic illnesses and diseases and problems because we've included more and more sugar and starches and refined carbohydrates in our diets than ever before. And we think that when we reduce the amount we take in on a daily basis that we're doing ourselves some good. But even at the quantities that we eat them at in today's environment, reducing it by 10% or 20% or even 50% just isn't enough to undo the damage that's been done. That's why I went to a full carnivore way of eating, because I needed something that was going to help me turn around some major problems. And it did. And if you're out there suffering with these major problems, if you're wondering why you have chronic illness and you figure, well, my family had that, my father had that, my mother had that, maybe they just were on the same diet that we've been on, even though ours seems to be getting crazier and crazier as we move toward, down this passage of time that we live in. The things I see in the aisles sometimes just blow my mind when I'm walking through the grocery store to get to where the meat section is, and I see these boxes of things where you can buy cereal that's made of cookies and cakes and all kind of, it's amazing what we will come up with and say, hey, they said this was safe to eat, and put it in your cart and go home and feed it to our kids. It's what we're eating that's making the big difference, and it can turn things around for you if you start cutting that garbage out of your life, get back to a natural human diet that involves meat, that may involve vegetables for some people. In my case, I went full carnivore because my gut problems were even not allowing me to reincorporate vegetables. And some people would argue that vegetables are not good for us anyway because the fiber actually damages our intestinal gut. You've got toxins in vegetables that are designed to keep them from being eaten that actually affect your digestion and can make you sick or even die. So, there's always questions about what you're doing with vegetables, but there's questions about everything in life. I say getting back to a more natural way of eating is very important for all of us. Even if you're not going to go full carnivore, find a way to get the ultra-processed junk out of your life, all these refined carbohydrates. Get back to a more natural way of eating. I would certainly encourage you to incorporate a good bit of meat into your way of eating, because there are so many vitamins and minerals that are available in meat that are not available in vegetation that you need to have what's in that meat. The meat literally has everything you need, especially when you're not eating carbohydrates. But there's a lot of angles to this that you've got to really feel out for yourself. I say going full carnivore is the best way to go because you're not dabbling with the things that cause your body to have trouble. When you're not consuming carbohydrates, your body can run on ketones. Your body can operate in a way that you've never operated before, that makes it easier to think, makes it easier to operate in your daily life because you feel better. It's not just about looking better. It's about feeling better, feeling healthy, feeling comfortable enough to do what you've got to do today. Well, speaking of what I got to do today, I've got to try to get this video edited and out for you so that I can get to work on time. So I'm going to have to take off. If you wouldn't mind sticking around, I got a quick commercial from one of my affiliates here, and I'll see you guys next time.
If we pay extra, could we maybe get some grease or fat?
All right, I'm taking a look at some ingredients of a very popular soap that people use to wash their body with. And it talks about key ingredients: lauric acid, glycerin, and titanium dioxide. Sounds really healthy. And then there's a number of other ingredients in this soap. One of them is sodium tallowate, which is really about the only thing you need to actually have soap. So why all this other stuff? I don't even want to ask why. I just want to get back to using regular soap. Sodium tallowate is tallow mixed with some kind of alkaline substance to make soap. Soap basically just makes the particles on your skin more soluble so that they can come off easier. Another way I've heard it put that I like is it makes water wetter. And that's all it needs to do to effectively do its job. You don't have to have all these chemicals on your skin to get your skin clean. And ultimately, that's what you're looking to do when you buy a bar of soap. And that's what I like about Vintage Tradition Tallow Balm Soap, is it only uses tallow made from suet and extra virgin olive oil. Extra virgin olive oil is that alkaline substance that gives that tallow its soapy appeal. And it does exactly what I'm looking for it to do and nothing extra. Balm is the name of this amazing bar of soap because it actually soothes and nourishes your skin instead of drying it out like other soaps that strip the skin of beneficial oils. It's pure, simple ingredients instead of toxic chemicals make it super hypoallergenic. This large, dense bar will last a long time, making it a great value, and its soft, silky lather is just an added bonus. Get yours at vintagetradition.com and use my discount code Dante, D-A-N-T-E, when you order to save 10%.